Welcome to season 2 of the Broken Open podcast. I'm Maureen Towns, author, speaker, expert on finding calm amidst chaos of helping those that you love with mental health and addictions issues. If you like what you hear on this podcast, be sure to subscribe so that you're the first to know when new episodes are released. And visit MaureenTowns.com to get in touch, stay current on our programs, Footsteps for Families and Freedom from Intergenerational Trauma, as well as updates on the book, which has just been released, called Broken Open. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
I'm wonderful today, Maureen, and yourself?
I'm awesome. I'm really excited that you're here to tell your story of hope and recovery. So, Mike, I know that you call yourself an integrative holistic recovery coach.
Mm-hmm.
What, for our listeners, what does that mean?
So to back it up, I think we're all recovering from something. My primary client base is substance abuse, but I support people to take an integrative holistic approach to address the whole of who they are. We have to address the whole person. So some of the 8 spokes of my recovery wheel, you might say, is spirituality, path to recovery, gut physical health, right? Work, life purpose, nutrition, relationships. So we have to address all of these. We have to address the whole person, I believe, to experience the healing.
Mm-hmm. So that's the integrative piece. I'm curious about that gut bit. So we might dive into that a little bit later. But so tell me and tell our listeners, if you would, how did you get to where you are? What brought you here?
Yeah, so I think adversity and challenge got me to where I am today. And that's my message, is that your pain and trauma and addiction can be an opportunity to awaken consciousness. And my journey started, like all of ours, in my mother's womb. And my mother experienced a trauma when I was in her womb, and I was swimming around in a sea of cortisol, of stress hormones. And I think that primed me epigenetically to get, early onset disease, as well as addiction. And if you look at the research through the ACE study, adverse childhood experiences, it's our experiences in childhood and, I believe, in utero and birth that can prime us for, early onset death, early onset illness, addiction, things of that nature. So I started off swimming in a sea of cortisol. And my mom had to flee her marriage to my father because what happened is my father was a minister, and he lived a double life. So she found out his secret, and part of his secret was being a homosexual, which is totally fine and okay. But also there were secrets in the closet when my dad, before he was a minister, he was a Catholic priest. And if you can only imagine where I'm going with this story is, yes, my father was part of the Catholic abuse scandal and the clergy scandal. And my mom discovered some of the things about him when I was in her womb. So she panicked, she fled, and she took off. And that was the beginning of my journey. My mom lost custody of my sister and I to my father because of my mother's alcoholism. My mother she's a textbook alcoholic. When she puts a sip of booze in her, she's gone. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, really profound change. And she couldn't take care of us. So my father took care of us till I was about 16. And then I started discovering the same way, discovering his secrets. And up until that time, I was the minister's son. My dad was holier than thou. And my life really flipped upside down once something told me to go look under his mattress. And then I did, and I found pornography. And then it opened up Pandora's box. And lo and behold, at that time, the Catholic abuse scandal was coming out, and my father had let me know things might come out in the media. Now, I'm about 17 years old. At this point, I have a $500 a day habit of Oxycontins because the pain and the trauma is so great. And lo and behold, I reached out for help with that addiction at that time to my mother, which she was in and out of 12-step. And she brought me to my doctor's office. And at that time, it was my pediatrician's office. So I sat next to him, next to a baby scale. And he looked at me and he said, okay, he looked me over, examined me. He said, you're good to go. And here I am, strung out to the gills, 138 pounds, white as a ghost. I was only eating Ensures at this time because I couldn't even digest food. And he said, you're ready to go to detox. And I
Wow.
looked at him and I said, ready to go to detox. And in my mind, I don't think this way now, obviously, but my ego and my pride couldn't allow me to go to detox. So I said, I'm not going to detox. And anyways, I left there and I got some support on the street. I played doctor with myself. I weaned myself off a $500 a day habit. And I haven't touched opiates to this day, 18 years later.
Mm.
And lo and behold, 30 days into that challenge, the news broke with my father. And I said, if I can stay sober through this, I can stay sober through anything. Now you can imagine, as a male too, being connected to someone who's been accused of pedophilia. It's a very deep topic. It's one of disgust, one of shame. And I was holding all that shame. And it took me a while to discover that it wasn't me, but here I am. I'm his son. And it was very traumatic for me. And luckily, I had graduated high school, thank God. And I was on my way, so I didn't have to experience the embarrassment with classmates and that sort of thing. But I was in so much pain. And that's why we use substances. You might not have a story of your dad being a Catholic pedophile priest, but whatever your story is in addiction, it's at the root of it is trauma and pain. And I was in a lot of pain and experiencing a lot of trauma. And then after that, I realized that it took me 2 years later to realize that, wow, I can't use anything really in safety at that time. So I reached out again for help when I was experiencing severe depression. I'd been 2 years off the opiates. And I said, Mom, I'm having, thoughts of using opiates again and thoughts of hurting myself. And it's just not, something isn't right. So she said, all right, let's go to check out a 12-step meeting. So I did. And I found community there. I found people to support me. I found love, and I stayed. And I don't still go to 12-step today, but that was my foundation. And I've been sober and in recovery for 16 years off everything, and I live a beautiful life today. But really, the turning point, when you say broken open, the broken open, all right, it still took me more suffering to be broken open. And how that happened was, as we know, even from work like from Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, books like that, we know the trauma resides in the body, right? The issues are in the tissues. And about 5 years into recovery, I bought a home, I renovated it, my life was good on the outside, but inside I was still dysregulated. Inside I was still, my nervous system is what we would call stuck on. I was constantly in fight or flight. I didn't know that. It just was the normal, program for me. And I was, staying busy. I was doing triathlons. I was in the gym twice a day, building up my armor. I was, redoing a house. And lo and behold, I got sick. And I had a lot of diarrhea. I had blood in my diarrhea. So I went to a GI doctor and I said, all right, well, we're going to do a colonoscopy. And he went up there and did his thing. And I got diagnosed with universalis ulcerative colitis, which means my whole colon was ulcerated. It's an autoimmune condition. And I knew nothing about it, but I knew I was in pain. And for the first time, I just began to kind of like look at it a little bit, but not really. I took all the anti-inflammatories they wanted me to do. A year later, I got into remission. I was working for a top 1,000 Fortune company at this time. And, bought my first home, like I said, and I decided to travel. So I traveled and I went to 9 countries. I traveled Central South America and I got a parasite in Guatemala. And the parasite tripped off the UC again. I came home early and I couldn't get this ulcerative colitis under control. So the inflammation, because we know the gut and the brain are so intricately connected, in fact, 90% of our feel-good neurotransmitter serotonin is made directly in our gut. 50% of our our dopamine is made in our gut. And I was suffering from mental health issues and inflammation in my gut. And lo and behold, the inflammation went from my stomach to my brain, and I developed what's called multiple chemical sensitivity.
Mm.
And what happened there was I got broken open from the pain and suffering. And my amygdalas in my brain, right, the fight or flight mechanism in your brain, like the smoke detectors, they were firing all day, every day. And that, just picture your worst anxiety times 1,000. And that's what I was living in every day.
Mm.
And when I breathed in chemicals through the olfactory nerve, it would go straight to the limbic brain, cause the overactivity. And I would go into these immense despair, these places of despair, and the smells of chemicals would throw me into that fight or flight. So I began to retreat to the woods. Now, as I said, I'm a minister's son. I'm a minister's son in a dogmatic kind of Christianity, fundamentalism Christianity, and so I had a lot of framework, a lot of religious trauma, a lot of beliefs that necessarily weren't in service to me, but I took on from that type of religious, upbringing. And I began to go into the woods and retreat because I couldn't stand this regular environment. It was too stimulating.
Mm.
The smells and so forth were it was very challenging. So I found myself in the forest, found myself pleading with the trees and hugging the trees and pleading for their strength and pleading for their roots to just root me and ground me and keep me from suffering. And I had a near death experience where I was in so much suffering, I thought I was going to die.
Mm.
And in the moments of deep meditation, now when I say deep meditation, I was practicing meditation for hours a day. I had left my corporate job. I could no longer work. And I began to go inward. And when I began to go inward, I had a mystical experience, and it reset and organized every cell in my body. And I had a profound shift in consciousness. And I got to see how I got into this situation, right? The diet, the lifestyle, the stress, the protecting mechanism I was doing in the gym of building up my armor so people couldn't get close to me, and my relationship or lack of there with women, and how I was running all the time. But the truth is what liberated me. So I had this profound experience, and it shifted every cell in my body to find healing, and my body began to heal. And I sat on the bench and I looked at these trees, and the mind was so still that the leaves were shimmering like diamonds. And I was just in a different alternate state of consciousness. And I knew right then and there in that moment, I wasn't there to save up for many houses, although, that may be part of my story one day, but that my whole motive changed for my life. And I was here to help people suffer less. And that was the pivotal moment. And I did all sorts of procedures to get my health back. Once again, I took this integrative approach within my own life and found I had to treat the whole of me. And that's what I do today, is now work with people who are in recovery from substance abuse to find and experience that deeper healing and transformation.
That entire whole body thank you for that. I'm curious though, that whole body transformation that you experienced, I mean, you were so desperate that you were driven to the woods. You thought you were dying. There's an awful lot of people out there who don't get to that point, but need what you've done, right?
Of course, yes.
They need that integrative approach. But, what I come across is, well, I want help, but not that much help. Like that kind of thing. Like, well, that's a lot, that's a lot of transformation that you're asking me to take. And and you look at the stages of change. How do you work with someone who doesn't want that much help? Like, they're not that broken open, they're not that broken yet. So someone's just, I just want to quit drinking. That's all I want. I just want to quit drinking or using drugs, because they think that's the issue. They don't yet understand that no, that's not the issue. The issue is, the trauma that's driven you to, like, it's a trauma behavior to drink and use and that sort of thing. So how do you do that with people?
Yeah. So as a practitioner, I have to meet everyone where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have to be delicate with them, but also help them find their edge. So for me, it took me 9 years into recovery to be broken open.
Mm-hmm.
And until that time happened, I was continuing to contribute to my suffering, but not even know it.
Yes.
So when people come to me, I have to meet them where they're at. And often what they're looking for is not really what they get.
Yeah.
So I tell them to just stay really open with the process,
Yeah.
and yeah, to really just take it a step at a time. And maybe they haven't had a near death experience, but their suffering is still driving them in some capacity for them to reach out, so we can work with what's there.
Got it. That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah. I hear what you're saying. Often what people show up for in my practice is, can you help me get my loved one to go to treatment, please? That's where we start. It's like, yeah, okay, we can talk about that. But, but it's usually, it's like, let's talk about, we end up in trauma
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
and trauma behaviors. And I think everyone out there has trauma, everyone, not always, like you said, as tangible or obvious as your story. You've got this father who's got this great scandal around him, and then you've got this shame and stuff that you're carrying about that. But everybody's got trauma.
We do. We all have trauma, and it's so common that people overlook it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So when I talk about trauma behaviors, I'm talking about anything that you're doing, right? Anything that you're using or doing um, that is helping you to not be with yourself.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Right? Like,
And, and when people come to us and we kind of give them what they need, it's really beautiful, because sometimes what we want and what we need are two different things.
mhm,
So it's important to understand that often the work is healing the relationship with themselves,
yes.
even if they have an addictive child, like forgiving themselves for what they're holding, and understanding their child is an adult and their own being, trying to find it in this world. And to, as my mentor would say, all sickness, whether you believe addiction is an illness or whatever, but all sickness is homesickness. All healing
Mhm,
is self-healing, a journey back home to your true self.
yeah.
So often it's a process leading them back to them.
Yeah. Leading them back to themselves. I love that. Yeah. I love that. All sickness is homesickness. And I'll talk to clients and they'll say, oh, my mom was awesome. My mom was awesome. I don't have trauma. Like I don't, or they invalidate their trauma. They'll say, well, this did happen to me, but I mean, it wasn't that bad. Like it's not like I was, raped and left on the side of the road. So therefore it's, what's my problem? Why can't I just? And I find that one of the biggest first steps is self-compassion and learning to maybe not invalidate yourself. So and I can see too why, with ulcerative colitis as one of your big symptoms, why you talk about gut and brain, the gut brain link. So can you, I mean, we all hear this, right? Your gut and your brain are linked. There's, you mentioned, serotonin and things like that in your gut. For dummies like me, how do you explain the link? What is it about my gut that's linked to my brain? Like, how is there neurotransmitters in
Mhm.
my gut, or how does this work?
Yeah, so we know from some of the research that trauma directly affects the microbiome, which is your whole ecosystem in your gut, all your different bacterias, which you have many of them, trillions, I believe. And we know that it can cause inflammation, that people with PTSD have higher levels of certain bacterias. For me, I had a dysbiosis in my gut, which means I had a very large amount of bad bacteria and a very little amount of good bacteria. So I needed to balance that off to heal. But the gut and the brain have a bilateral communication with each other through what's called the vagus nerve. Now, vagus in Latin, it means wanderer. And the vagus nerve, it's also the 10th cranial nerve. It goes directly in the back through the limbic system, down back in the spine, and goes out to every organ system. So if you look at the work of Dr. Stephen Porges with the polyvagal theory, we're receiving 80% of our information from our body to our brain. And most everyone's like, oh my God, I'm stuck in this brain of mine, you know, this mind between the chin and the crown. But little do they know is they're getting most of the information from the viscera or the tissues, right, that are actually holding the burdens. So we know trauma resides in the body, right? And we have to address the gut. We have to address the neurobiology, the brain and nervous system, so we can begin to find balance in the mind body. Now, if you think of addiction, you're grabbing something from the external world and putting it in us when we're talking about substance abuse. Now, what are we doing in that moment? We're trying to fix what's in here. So maybe you were shut down, like, you know, like you were in more of like a dorsal vagal response, which is shut down, disconnected. And maybe methamphetamines did it for you, or cocaine, because it brought you up and you felt connected, you could dance, whatever. Or maybe you were like me and you were primed in sympathetic overdrive, fight or flight, stuck on. And when you take an opiate, you like land the plane. You're like, oh my God, I've arrived. Now, when you look at that, it's so interesting that opioid pathways and a mother's love are the same pathways. For example, when I took opiates, that was like my mother coming back. It was this beautiful sense of security and warmth. And you know, she was taken away from me at 3 years old. So there's many different things going on here, but the trauma gets held in the viscera, and we have to begin to take that multifactorial approach to experience healing. Now, when we do our trauma work and we move from the subcortical parts of our nervous system, the activation of fight or flight or shutdown, and we integrate the cortical, the prefrontal cortex, right? This is the seat of executive function, decision making, reasoning, social engagement, safety with other people. I mean, do you think this is an important part of the brain to be connected to when it comes to addiction? I mean, of course. So 12-step and all those programs are great, but they're lacking some huge components. It's kind of an old paradigm. We have to step into addressing the neurobiology, and I believe we have to address the spiritual component of actually being connected with the essence of who we are. And I believe that's at the root of addiction too, is the disconnection. But when we can move up the hierarchy of our nervous system and reconnect with the higher cortical of thinking, you know, that's why the monks and the sages and all them are doing chanting and all that ohms and all that. They're literally vibrating that vagus nerve to reconnect to the higher levels of consciousness of their brain. So I think this is where we need to go.
That's so fascinating. I like the way you explain all of that. I'm not that scientific in my explanation, so that's very, very cool. So I'm like, my mind is just like full of like ideas here.
Yeah, wherever you want to go, we can go.
Yeah, like I'm listening to a book right now called What Happened to You? Have you come across this, with Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey?
I haven't, but it's actually the first living question that my mentor taught me. So it's interesting.
Yeah, well, there you go. So the book is all about, trauma, right? We all have trauma. And the shift that they're trying to make with this book is, instead of asking what's wrong with you, let's talk about what happened to you. So let's stop making like there's something wrong. What's happening for you, right, is a very natural response to trauma, or a very unnatural environment, or, and I think, and I'm hearing so many things are just coming together like this. You've got Gabor Mate and the wisdom of trauma. You've got Stephen Porges, like you said, with the polyvagal theory. So much somatic work going on. Peter Levine's the big name there, but I mean, and there's, I just listened to just started another book called The Apology. Have you heard of this book?
I haven't.
Okay, I'm going to blow your mind.
You're giving me a lot of good book recommendations.
Yeah. Well, I'm overwhelmed with stuff to listen to that's all sort of connected. So this book, The Apology, is written by Eve Ensler. And so essentially she was abused by her father, and he's long dead by the time she writes this book. And what she does is sit down and channel through, and it's very healing. She ends up feeling very compassionate towards him, and it's very healing. She writes the apology she wants to have from him. It's beautiful. quite good. It's quite interesting. It's heavy. Do you mind if I dig into your father a little bit?
I don't.
Okay. And answer only what you're comfortable with. But I have talked to other people whose fathers were abusive to children. And one of the big fears they have, and shame, hanging on to the shame and the secrecy of it, is their fear that society is going to look at them and assume that they were abused. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't like that assumption, and I don't want to deal with that. And, or we've all heard some of the stats around that, if you're an abuser, chances were you were abused. And so then the people flip that around and say, well, then if you were abused, you must be an abuser, or have a tendency or a proclivity towards abuse. Have you come across that? And, or how do you, you're very open about it, and so you've tackled some of these issues, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. How did you do that?
Yeah, so I'm still actually on the journey of discovering if my father ever abused me. It's still unclear. I think the closest thing that I've even really allowed me to see that is a journey with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy with MDMA. Mm-hmm. So and it was unclear. So I know one thing he always used to say to us was, to my sister and I, was, I never hurt you kids. And it took me years to figure out what he meant by that. And mm-hmm. and I really believe that he meant that he never sexually abused us. Mm-hmm. Now, what does my body say? I mean, my body's never really revved up per se or given me, cues of that. But I think at least what showed up for me in MDMA therapy was I took on some of his perpetrating energy as an infant. Okay. Because my as an infant, you're so clear, you're taking in everything from the outside. And at least that's what came up. Now, the thing with, having a father that's accused of pedophilia, there was the deep shame that was connected to that. Like, could I be a pedophile? Mm-hmm. All those crazy thoughts were going on in my mind, but that wasn't me. I never had an interest in children. I'm heterosexual, and I always, gravitated towards women my age. Mm-hmm. And, but it was really wire tangling, let's just say. And I had to work a lot of that out to kind of talk about the discovery that if they're abusing people, they must have been abused. Mm. Now, that came to me crystal clear, that something happened to him. Mm-hmm. So just like that woman of that book that got to write the apology, I got to have the conversation with my father mm-hmm. that I needed to put closure to this. Now, I stopped talking to my dad because I needed to set some really strong boundaries with his narcissism and just the craziness. It just was time to say enough was enough. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't to the point where I was holding this deep, dark resentment. I mean, I've done a lot of work, and yet I knew something happened to him. So
Hmm.
I asked him, and I was in the backyard, my, walking around in my gardens in my bare feet, and I had this conversation with him on the phone, and I said, what happened to you? Tell me who abused you.
Yeah.
And he told me.
Yeah.
He told me who abused him. It was years and years of abuse. It was terrible. And I listened to him with this open heart.
Yeah.
And he really, I think, for the first time, began to put his guard down with me, because I think for a long time he knew I was a male.
Yeah.
He knew one day I would grow up to be a man, and maybe I would condemn him or shame him or whatever. But I held this space for him, and he said, Michael, you're the only person. He was about 72 at the time. He said,
Oh,
Michael, you're the only person I've ever told this to. And I said, and I don't think he was abusing children at the end there. I think he had his situations in the seminary.
got it.
And he explained that he was abused as a young age and he was frozen at this younger age. Now, I'm not justifying his behavior whatsoever, but things get screwed up, and he was screwed up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I get what you're saying. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it.
yeah, totally. And so I told him, I said, go be gay. If you're gay, like, go be
Yeah.
gay, go dance in the rain, do what you have to do. Of course, don't hurt people.
Yeah.
And that was a very healing conversation as well. He validated me, and I told him how, sick my body was and from holding all this stress and trauma. And it was a really, healing conversation. So you may have heard before, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And I don't think, you know, because you've been abused, sexual abuse is part of my story. From another situation, we're still working out my dad. I don't know there, like I say, it's not crystal clear, but sexual abuse is a part of my story. So I don't think it makes you an abuser. It hasn't made me an abuser. But it potentially could do that if it was severe enough or it affected you in a certain way, but not for everyone.
I think you found other I think you found solutions in drugs and alcohol, and like you say, you stored your trauma. You didn't act it out necessarily.
Yeah, and I had a really healthy anger response.
Me too.
As,
Me too.
as a young kid, you'd catch me with both my middle fingers up to my parents or whoever it was, because I had to let it out. And
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah. And if you get support too, like from when I had my sexual trauma, I got support right away. I told my mother a little while longer. I was young,
Mhm.
but she brought me into therapy and I spoke about it, I talked about it. And I think that really helped too. But I think, not I think, but I know trauma really happens when you have lack of support, when no one's there to hear you or see you or be with you or navigate what happened to you. That's how we become traumatized.
Yes, agreed. My definition of trauma is always evolving, and um, what it is for me now. Because I used to say, how did, I grew up in a really traumatic house. How did I, come out so functionally? And my kids grew up in a house where there wasn't trauma as I defined it. And so then what's their deal? Like, why are they struggling with this stuff? And so trauma for me is a completely different ball of wax now. Trauma for me really is about, when you're a kid, you need connection to an adult to regulate your emotions. And if you
Mhm.
don't have that and you're left on your own with them, they are completely overwhelming. You can't process them. And like you say, you just deny them, which then ends up being stored in the cells, which I would have had a really hard time getting my head around and thought, oh, I don't know about that, until I did EMDR therapy. And I experienced, just sitting still comfortably, and oh my God, my knee hurts. Oh, now it's my shoulder. I could feel it moving around,
Mhm.
which was wild. Like I never would have, like I'm too skeptical. Had I not had that experience, I would have been like, here we go again, someone talking about trauma in the cells. But I get it. I really do.
For
And so,
sure. And
yeah, trauma is your inability to, or you can't process the feelings. And so you store them.
yes, the energy, the traumatic activation gets stuck in your body.
Mhm.
And yeah, and trauma, like I said earlier, it can be so overlooked. For example, if you hadn't gone on your journey for a period of time, then you may be passing down generational trauma or your unprocessed trauma to your children without even recognizing it.
Absolutely. I now understand how invalidating the environment was for my children, and I couldn't give them what I didn't have. And so and then I look to my own mom and my own dad, and I think, oh, of course they couldn't give me what they'd never had. So
Hmm.
of course, in this way, and in addition to what you talk about, the cortisol soup that you swam around in as
Hmm.
before you were born. I mean, that happened with my kids too. I was very stressed and didn't know how to handle it. Like, yeah, of course, I set them up really in with the best of intentions, you know, um, to have this. And the hope in here for me is that I can break that cycle by healing now. And I think, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. By healing now, I can heal, um, break the cycle of trauma, the intergenerational trauma that's been passed on. But also, there's part of me that believes I can heal my children and also heal my parents.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm doing it right
Ta-da.
now. I don't have children, but I'm doing a lot of it right now. So I think I just want to say first, thank you for your courage to just be so open and maybe sharing the truth of how you may have afflicted them in certain ways, not even consciously. And
Yeah.
I think that in itself is so powerful to have a mother that said, "Hey, I knew what I knew, and I'm sorry, and I'm
Mhm.
here to do my own work to help you heal." And for the listeners, the moms, the parents, this isn't a shame session on what you didn't do for your kid.
No.
Trauma is passed down unconsciously.
Yeah.
And until we, like, once again, Carl Jung says, we don't become enlightened by imagining images of light, but by only making the darkness conscious.
Mm.
So we have to make this darkness conscious in
Mhm.
order for us to heal it. So I have my mother about 2 rooms over living in my home
Yeah.
in Sedona, and I brought her here to heal
Yeah.
because here I was with, like, this is the analogy. I have like all these 5-gallon bottles of water, and yet I'm watching my mother die of thirst in this 1-bedroom place she was renting back in Massachusetts. I
Mhm.
have all this knowledge and wisdom, although I'm not here to, let's say, codependently heal her. Do I think I'm here to heal her in some way or another? Sure. I think it's just part of our soul contracts. Um, I have set her up with her practitioners to help her heal,
Yeah.
but I'm supporting her on the journey because I have done my work.
Mhm.
So if you don't want to traumatize your kids or you want to help heal them, the biggest thing that you can do as a parent is to do your own work.
Agreed.
Now, just like you said earlier, Maureen, until a child is about 18 months, you are the regulator for that child's nervous system.
Mhm.
So, and if you couldn't attune to your child in a proper way because of you were overstressed or whatever the situation may be, I'm not talking directly to you, Maureen, but maybe the listeners, then
It's
that
okay.
can be, yeah, that can be traumatic for the
Yeah.
child, for the little nervous system. Divorce is traumatic. Deaths in the family are traumatic. Having an alcoholic parent is traumatic. Some of our children have been sexually abused and we have no idea. That's
Mhm.
traumatic.
Mhm.
So for sure, trauma is at the root.
Yeah. And I think about, when my kids were infants, there was this physician named Ferber, and he had this theory on getting kids to sleep through the night. It was called Ferberizing your kids. Basically, you let them cry. And I was quite
Yeah.
pleased with myself for doing this. I was quite, I'm tough. I know what's important, and I'm going to do the hard thing, and I'm going to, progressively each night let them cry longer and longer before I respond. And I had no idea, man. And that makes me sad. But again, going back to the compassion, I gotta have some compassion for myself in that, not to excuse it. Like I, you know, I, it this is what I did with the best that I had. And I can do the work now, and I can help to explain to them, like, guys, if you don't, like, this is pre-memory for you. So this is one of the things that happened, in our home. And this might be, something you want to work on in therapy at some point, because that's rough. Like, now that I understand the neurodevelopment and the emotional development of the brain and the overactive limbic system, and oh my God, it's heartbreaking to think back, but now I can talk about it and support other mothers and learning. And yeah, it's the way that it was.
Yeah, and thank you once again for that ownership. It's really powerful. Yeah, it's really validating.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned soul contract. Tell me about that, because I use that language as well. What do you mean by that?
So yeah, maybe to get a little woo-woo here,
Let's
I think
go.
we've all, come as a soul, we've all inhabited this body to hold the soul and spirit. And I think we work out soul contracts here on planet Earth with particularly our parents and lovers and people. Um, and we have to kind of fulfill these, or these soul contracts come into our lives for a reason. And often it's for us to evolve. I think all of this is for us to evolve. I think this whole reality in on planet Earth is school. This whole thing is school.
Mm.
And we have the opportunity to learn lessons. And if we don't learn them, we continue through karmic evolution until we learn them. And we're gifted with the people, including our parents, to help us learn these lessons we need to learn as a soul.
Mm-hmm.
So as challenging as my childhood was, and the Mount Everest like hurdles between trauma, addiction, chronic illness, it was so perfect that it birthed a new consciousness for me.
Yeah.
Now, what I mean by that is pain, addiction, all of this is an opportunity to awaken consciousness. So as the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh says, no mud, no lotus. So the beautiful lotus grows from the slimy, dirty, dark mud. She puts her taproot down in there, and that's how she gets her nutrients. In fact, if you pull a lotus out of the ground, which I have before, it doesn't last long at all in water. It needs the mud.
Mm-hmm.
And I've needed the mud in life. I've needed every single situation for me to get to where I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And the suffering is what allows us to be broken open for the light to shine through. So whatever you're going through today or have gone through, maybe it's perfection. Maybe it's here in service, not happening to you, but happening for you.
Yes.
So can you open to that? And when you do open to that, you literally are going to break karmic reactions in condition responses to aversion, and you're going to be able to open up to a whole different dimension when you can move through the pain and trauma. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the Buddhist and Taoist, Peter Levine refreshed me in one of his books. He said the Buddhist and Tao have 4 doorways to spiritual evolution. One is meditation, one is death, one is tantric sex, and the 4th one is trauma. Mm-hmm. So I have used 2 of these doorways to awaken, which is meditation and trauma. So pain and addiction and illness are an opportunity for you.
Yeah. And I think I like what you mentioned about, these things are happening for you to bring you back to yourself. And I think about Gabor Mate's, movie, The Wisdom of Trauma, which is free, I think, this weekend, if you want to watch it.
It is.
Yeah.
Highly suggest it. It's amazing.
Great movie. And he does some interview and conversations with Stephen Porges, actually, in the background. But he talks about this, like all the angst and the pain and the suffering are breadcrumbs that if you follow will bring you back to yourself, the parts of you that have, these are my words, splintered off for the sake of survival. But this is his messaging, but my words put to it. But yeah, so I love that. Tell me a little bit about some of the psychedelic training and how you use do you use, I guess my question is, psychedelics in your practice?
So I'm a graduate of the Salt City Psychedelic Therapy Program. And I do believe that psychedelics are here to help people awaken. And they're really these sacraments that allow us to see things with new eyes and have the great potential for healing. I don't think they're for everyone. That's for sure. I don't administer or do psychedelic therapy myself. I support people and clients if they want to have those experiences, that they use them with the correct people, medicine men. And I do assist them with the integration of that and what they experience, which is another huge, big part of the puzzle. But psychedelic therapy is really, it's coming out in the forefront right now through MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're going to be probably getting MDMA, which is the street drug ecstasy. It's probably going to be legalized in the next year or two as a breakthrough therapy for people with PTSD. So, other compounds such as psilocybin, I think, is having huge, beautiful results, in ayahuasca. So I think these can really support people. And I know some people who are in the recovery community are like, wait, what do you mean? Like, mind altering substances are going to heal me?
Yeah.
Now, what I say to that is if your consciousness isn't ready, or you may have had a history of using them and abused them, then they may not be right for you at this time.
Yeah.
If you didn't abuse them, but you're holding the idea that how could this possibly heal me, then I encourage you to stay open. And I think your consciousness has to be ready to understand that we've been healing with plants and fungus for a long, long, long time. And when they're used in the right set, right? So the right mindset setting, the dose, the right guide, the substance is correct. When all of these parameters line up and it's done in the right therapeutic context, you can have amazing results. I particularly have explored with ayahuasca with a shaman in Costa Rica. I've done a session of MDMA assisted journeying here with some people out near me. I've used psilocybin. And once again, I don't use these, or we don't use these to get out of ourselves. We use them to go in. And this is what we're all running from, is what's inside of us. Think of addiction. I mean, this is the definition of running. So I think they have the great potential for us to experience our own wholeness. They have the great potential for a reset in our nervous system, and for us to see ourselves in our own wholeness in a way that we normally can't see from this state of consciousness.
Awesome. I did an ayahuasca retreat as well. It was interesting. My kids laugh because I told them I can explain the time-space continuum to you now. I can actually I'll draw it for you. Like, makes perfect sense to me now.
Well, they're like, Mom, you're losing your mind.
Yeah, they're like, Mom, you're a freak. This is awesome. Like, they think this is great. Yeah.
You are awesome. You're an awesome woman.
Yeah, they're quite interested in all that. So, so is there anything? So you work, like you said, from Sedona. I'm guessing, but please confirm for us, that you can work with anyone in the world, because I'm gonna ask, do you do this remotely?
Yes. I work with people remotely, and some people fly in to experience the land in Sedona, and we do work here too, but primarily it's remotely at the moment.
Cool. And is there anything, this will probably come out, so today's June the 18th, but this may be a few weeks before it comes out. Is there anything that you're promoting currently, or anything that you want to share with listeners about what's coming in your practice?
Well, I have a lot of things that are developing right now. You can go to my website to learn more about me, and I'm redoing my website, thank God, because it's old and it's a lot of content on there, but bear with me. You can go check it out there. then I have my own podcast, which I would love for you to be a guest on too, if you'd love
Oh,
to
I'd
do
love
that.
to. Yeah.
It's called the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast.
Okay.
I'm a little backdated right now with guests, but we can make it happen. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram and social media and under Mike Govoni.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I'll put all the
that's
links to this stuff in the show notes for sure. Yeah. Anything else that you want to share? Sorry, I think I cut you off there.
No, I think we covered a lot of ground today. I think whether you're a parent dealing with an addicted child or you're suffering from addiction yourself, as Maureen said, self-compassion is the medicine.
Mhm.
And to understand, your child probably may have put you through hell, maybe not, I don't know. But at the root, they're suffering, and they
Mhm.
don't mean to do the things they do. They're in pain, and to create boundaries for yourself is important, but really just know that this being is suffering. And if you're in pain today, once again, leaning into the discomfort is where the transformation happens. So we're all given our pain to birth something greater. So really it's a true gift, and when you can understand that and be on the other side, your world can completely change. So I'm just happy to be here having this conversation with you, Maureen. And it's really nice to know a courageous mother and human like you that's gone on her own journey and just doing what she's doing. It's really beautiful to be here.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I love your story. Thank you for sharing it. You're very open, like you said, and you indicated that several times to me. Man, I'll go anywhere. I'll talk about anything. So and it's such it's refreshing. It's a big breath of fresh air because, you're speaking what a lot of people are experiencing, but don't want to talk about. So thank you for that. There's so much healing in that. And I love that you keep referring to broken open. For me, people will say, well, isn't it great that you've, kind of made the best of it? And I'm like, no, 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 you're not getting what I'm saying here. This was a gift that brought me back, started me on the journey maybe of bringing me back to who I am. It broke me open in the best way possible. I don't know that I would have done the work that I've done had my kids not set me on this path. I'm so grateful. Like, it's not just, oh, lemons out of lemonade. This has been the best thing ever. What a journey.
The best thing ever. I love that. And same
Yeah.
thing, multiple chemical sensitivity, irritable bowel, all of it set me up to be broken open. So
Yeah.
we're speaking a language now that maybe not everyone can identify with, but it's there
Mhm.
when we're ready to turn towards what's here and
Mhm.
navigate it to allow it to transform us.
Yeah. Fantastic, Mike. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Maureen. It's been a
Okay.
pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Friends, thanks for listening. And if you liked this episode, please be sure to click on the thumbs up below for YouTube and comment. What did you like most? And what do you want to hear more of? I'd love to hear from you. And in case you missed it, the website is maureentowns.com. Bye.